All right, do we want to actually just amputate this leg?
We can do that.
We can do that. All right, so we have our patient here, unfortunately a Confederate soldier named Lou, who has a leg wound, which we need to anticipate what we're going to find in here. So we probe that wound with the best tools that we have, our fingers. You want to probe that also, doctor? Typically 2 out of 3 surgeons need to agree that the limb needs to go before we'll amputate. And you agree with me that
totally
it does
agree, yes.
indeed need to go. Now, our sorting surgeon, who has seen this patient before he got on our table, agreed also, or he wouldn't be on our table. And the assistant surgeon at the battle also agreed that this patient needed to be tended to, or he wouldn't have come to us. So fortunately for him, we can probe this wound without him being put to sleep yet, because he has already had at least 2 doses of opium for the pain. One at the field dressing station and one by our sorting surgeon.
So he's not feeling much anyway.
We can probe this wound without him having any issues. So are we ready? Are you prepared to
yes.
amputate? All right, let's do that. Let me get some nice.
How many people got had their legs amputated or limbs? Most of them?
Not 2 out of 3 surgeons need to agree that that needs to happen.
On the battlefield, that's just how it went. You know, you had a bunch of people, and yes, there were quite a few that required amputation. Your Lister
this
and
is a lower. Well, you have
Lister
both.
and the Caitlin.
We'll use the Catlin knife though, because that's the appropriate knife for this location.
Copy.
Yeah. So we have our tourniquet. Let's make sure that's good and tight. That's good. I don't see any bleeding now. Okay. I did not find a bullet in there. There was no exit wound, but
through and through.
No, it did not come out. I don't know where it might be. We'll find out. Okay, are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
You want to steady as I cut?
I will steady as you cut, yes.
Now, how are we going to do this with him?
Oh. You would be cutting through the layers of skin. Obviously, we're not doing this to a real person, so it's just a mock-up.
One thing we need to do, put him to sleep.
That might be useful, yes. Okay.
I thought he already had opium.
He did have
opium.
He did have opium, so he wouldn't be feeling that as much.
He might still be awake. We want to make sure that he's unconscious.
Awake whenever we were probing him. Once we start,
is that ether?
We could use ether out here
or
in the outside. You would not use ether inside a building because the fumes are heavier than there and they're very volatile. When you get enough of them congregated on the floor, if somebody's smoking a cigar and they drop a match, boom. Outside, we can use ether. Chloroform is our preferred anesthesia that we would use.
Anesthetic, yes. Or if you're in the Confederate side and you don't have a whole lot of chloroform to use, a limited amount, you could also use this, which is the Chisholm inhaler created by J.J. Chisholm of North Carolina.
Fascinating device. It was very inventive. As the war went on and the Confederacy medical supplies are becoming more and more limited, that was definitely a bonus for them to have. Whereas for us in the Union Army, we would use probably about 7 or 8 drops of anesthesia for our patient to put him to sleep for our acquired amount of time, 10 to 12 minutes. Whereas in the Chisholm inhaler, only needs 2 or 3 drops for the same length of procedure. The nice thing with that is there's a sponge up inside. Whenever you put the anesthesia into there, stick it in his nostrils with the appropriate probes, what happens is he inhales that. When he exhales, that sponge recaptures that anesthesia. So he's just basically re-anesthetizing himself throughout the procedure. Okay?
How long did the procedure last?
Typically about 10 minutes. A good surgeon can amputate a leg at the hip in 7 minutes. Now that 7 minutes involves getting him on the table, us both assessing the wound, applying the tourniquet, putting him to sleep, severing the flesh, severing the bone, tying off the vessels, packing the wound, tacking it back shut, bandaging him up, and moving him off. 7 minutes. Now, if our anesthesia lasts for 12 minutes, we have 5 minutes extra that we can use to perfect our technique or develop new ones. I hesitate to use the word play, but we have 5 minutes to play with to develop these new techniques.
They didn't wash hands, they didn't wash the instrument.
Oh yeah, we would. We have our nice natural sea sponge here that we're going to wash our tools off with. So, you know, we wash our saw, wash his limb,
From the same
but then,
blood,
okay,
yes.
we ready? Okay, so now we continue. We can do our flap from our skin, and we always cut up above the wound, okay? Now, we're not actually going to cut this leg off, but we can demonstrate how we do that. And we'll just move our wound down to here. So we can do this, right?
Yeah, you just, yeah.
Well, we can actually sever the flesh here.
Yeah.
And then we do have,
Yes.
okay. So what we have here, I'll steady and you can cut this time. Yeah.
What, 32 passes?
No more than 35. If it takes more than 35 passes to cut through the bone, you need to sharpen your saw. These are not real full passes either, so kind of tough to do.
I wonder if the patient wakes up or starts to move.
He should, well, if he
Don't
starts to
foul.
move, that's why we have somebody holding him down, okay? The assistant will be steadying the limb or while the surgeon is cutting. So we have severed that bone, file down here.
Oh.
The limb is severed, so out of the way it goes. You want to file on here, file on there. Seems pretty smooth. My saw is cutting very nicely.
File the bone down.
Yes. It's very important
make sure
for
there's no edges.
for a leg in particular, because
I would never think of that.
once the wound is healed, if there's any sharp edges on there, when he gets his prosthetic limb, every step he takes is going to be a constant pain. We don't want that, because then, one, the wound's not going to heal properly, and it's a bad reflection on us, not on my watch. So we're going to make sure this is as smooth as possible. So what we do next is our vessels, the veins and arteries, we're going to pull them out and tie them off. We use a tenaculum to do that. Can you get a ligature, please?
Sure.
Yep.
So the vessels are actually tough enough that you can grab them with that thing?
Oh, yes. And whenever we sever the flesh, they're very elastic, so they retract up in. That's why we do use our tenaculum. It's a small, sharp hook to grab a hold and pull them out some. I have it pulled out farther than we normally would here, but there's one.
The ligature you want.
Oh, that'll work. That'll work. Can you tie that around there? So now this is the important thing with using a tourniquet of petit whenever we're doing an amputation, as opposed to just a field tourniquet, because this will allow us to loosen up the tourniquet and check and make sure that these ligatures are intact. And, you know, if there's arteries that we're tying off, the pressure from the heart could indeed blow these ligatures right off the end if they're not tight enough. So another one.
So if
you
it
want one
blows up, then
Yeah.
if it blows off, then what? You just have to do it
We have to
again?
tie it again.
So
Yes.
you have to put the tourniquet back.
Well, yeah, we would just tighten it up.
Tighten it.
So we'll let it there till we're done. So we got one there. Okay. So there's that one.
Dissolvable?
No.
Dissolvable?
No, the thing of it is, these are going to hang out the end of the stump once we have him wrapped up. After about 2 days, what we're going to do is give a pull on this. I haven't already done. We're going to give a tug on this. We'll have our tourniquet in place. If the ligature comes out easily from the stump with no gush of blood, that vessel has sealed itself off now. If we pull and it comes out easily and there is a gush of blood, now we pulled it off the end of that ligature, quite often that vessel has actually sloughed off of itself. So then we would tighten it back up. Again, this is about 2 days after the procedure. So we'll put him back to sleep, tighten up the tourniquet, take our sutures that we have tacking the wound shut, and just snip them open, pull this vessel out, ligate it up higher, and then we started day one again.
Oh.
So
What is that?
Yeah, I was going to ask you what.
this is horsehair that my Confederate counterpart would use because
We would run out of
their supplies were limited,
cotton suture, so
or silk thread.
General Grant decided that it was time for the war to come to an end. He blockaded everything and cut off all the supplies to the South. So that they had to figure out what they were going to use. They came across horsehair and decided that, well, unfortunately, it's right next to the horse's rump. So they had to clean that. They put it in a large vat of large boiling pot.
And we know what part of the horse this would come
Yeah.
from. It's the tail.
Yeah.
So
The thing that they didn't know was that it changed
the disulfide bonds of the
disulfide
hair. So it
bonds.
changes the property of the hair itself. You know, we both sides
Makes
prefer
it
to use black
strong.
silk thread,
Really?
So you
which
can
is very
suture.
strong. But when
So
this
you
was
use
done,
two
The boiling
strands or one?
one.
They would attach it to a
Monofilament.
needle, and then they would start stitching the wounds with it. And the funny thing is that as time went on, after the surgery took place, there was no laudable pus. There was no red and angry skin. No hot. It wasn't hot because they didn't know why. Well, they didn't know why.
And
Essentially,
it was because what?
because it was boiled.
And
Oh,
all those,
That
They didn't
didn't
realize
come
it was
around
doing
until
the
10 years later.
that germ theory isn't available yet. But again, as they say, hindsight was always 20/20.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do here is now just tack the wound shut. I have some packing material in here, and we're just going to add a couple sutures to tie this shut, and then we will proceed on from there.
Will somebody be checking him and
Oh,
giving
yeah.
more
We
ether
would,
if
we would be
needed?
continuing.
No, during the procedure, we would typically have our hospital steward up there.
Yeah.
That's his job, is
We'd
to
be watching
put the
any
patient
eye
to sleep.
movement And, any idea of him, or
Moving.
we'd be watching for any sign of him waking up.
I used to have to do that for my dad, who was a veterinarian. I used to have to hold the can over the dog's nose while he did surgery. But that was a long time ago.
Well, that's pretty much,
That's
you were doing the same thing.
Yeah,
with
pretty
it.
much
the
it.
Steward. Yeah, that's why. We went to
Do we
the
have scissors?
battlefield of Antietam one year,
Mhm.
years and years ago, and we went to a field
You
hospital
seem to work.
and saw.
Yeah, they do.
kinda the same thing.
Here?
Yeah,
It's
good.
35 years ago.
We're going to bandage
But
up
this is
now.
cool. They don't do like we went to Antietam again, and they didn't do anything like this.
Were you at the Pry House there? You remember?
What?
The
Pry?
Pry House?
Oh,
It was a field hospital
Fry house is-
during the
it's a
time,
house next to a
but
big barn.
it's a barn. The barn was actually used during the war
Oh, okay.
as a hospital. Dr. Britton, who I portray, was actually there. And Jonathan Letterman was actually there. He's the medical director of the Army of the Potomac. So you'll see I do have these ligatures hanging out the end of the stump.
Yes.
So after about 2 days, then we will indeed give a pull on this. He's going to be transported over into our hospital tent for recovery.
So when he wakes up, he's going to be in a lot of pain.
Well, he's actually going to wake up again. Remember, he already has
Already had
had
opium on
2
board.
doses of opium. So he's not going to be in as much pain. But what we will do when we go to move him is give him a dose of a product called laudanum. Laudanum is opium dissolved in alcohol, which is a good thing because for him, the alcohol portion will initially give a little bit of that euphoria to help get him up off the table while we move him over. And then once he gets into the hospital tent, the central nervous system depressant portion of that alcohol will take effect and he will calm down so that he can relax. Now, you notice I did not put this on incredibly tight. I just snugged it up. Unfortunately, My Confederate counterparts, when they did their bandaging, they had to let them on a little bit looser because they did not have anywhere near as much staff available to check these bandages periodically. So
very limited. One of the most well-known is Phoebe Pember. She's quite the woman.
So would this come off when you moved them, or you leave them?
we would actually take that off when we check this. It is loose now because it's not held in place. We didn't demonstrate that, but it does loosen up as we're checking our ligatures.
Did you say Phoebe Pember?
Phoebe Pember, yeah, she was one of the Confederate nurses. She was down at Chimborazo Hospital. There were a few others, but I can't think of their names right away.
Yeah, we don't really hear the women's
One
names.
story that I can remember from Phoebe, and I've told it quite a few times, is she was left to watch over the whiskey stores from some of the men that were there. Well, the main doctor, I forget his name as well right now.
He went to procure more supplies.
He went to go get more supplies, exactly. And then while he was gone, she was left in charge of the whiskey stores. Well, he gave her a pistol. And he said, just hang on to this. And she said, I don't need that because they're just hospital patients. And then as soon as he left, he had a few people right off the bat come knocking on the door saying, hey, Phoebe, we want some of that whiskey. And Phoebe said, in layman's terms, she said no. And they said, no, Phoebe, we want some whiskey. She said, no. And then they decided that she went into the room where the whiskey was hiding, where it was stored. And she picked up the pistol, and they came to her, and they knocked the door open. They said, we're here for the whiskey. And she took the pistol, cocked the hammer back, and she said, okay, but one of you is going to have more holes in them. And she sat there with a pistol, cocked and loaded, and they approached her a little bit, and then she pointed the weapon at him, scared out of her mind.
And they were equally.
But then they realized that she was, when her hands started shaking, and they know she's that scared, and her fingers on the trigger, they backed off and said, okay. And they left her alone. Doc comes back. She put the pistol away. And he says, how's it going? And she said, oh, everything's fine.
Like a tough old broad.
So while you're operating on this guy, what would the scene be like in the sounds and smells?
Chaotic.
Chaotic. Once he gets to this point, though, we use the term, it's organized chaos. There's no chaos here. We're doing our job. There's other people over here. Yes.
That you tune that out.
Under here, we tune that out. We're focused on this.
Yeah, but you're just
once
in the
we're done,
lean-to like
we're going to have him moved off the table into recovery. We say next patient is on the table.
And so, how many of these guys would die? Like half?
We saved
Statistically?
more lives than we lost.
Statistically, the closer to the trunk of the body your amputation is, the lower your survival rate.
Yeah. Exactly.
Example, you amputate a finger or a toe, and the arm and leg are pretty comparable. The leg is a little bit lower survivability based on it's bigger. But finger or toe, you have a 97% survival rate. Get to the ankle and to the wrist, like 65 and 55%. To the elbow and the knee, you got about 55 and 40 or 35%. To the shoulder and the hip, 12 and 6% survival rate.
Yeah, so you said that you did, like, it was easier to cut through the hip.
Oh, it wasn't easier.
Oh, no.
A good surgeon could do that in 7 minutes. It's not necessarily easier because there's more, that is more involved. That's why the survival rate's so much lower.
But so when would they have to cut through? If the damage was like right here, they'd have to do the hip?
Yes.
So
if it was in the upper thigh, you would amputate at the hip.
Which is a lot riskier than doing the lower portions.
Yeah.
Because of
And
the chances of
those
just going up the
statistics
side.
that I gave you are if the patient is wounded and he's operated within 24 hours of the wound. If it's more than 24 hours, take all the statistics that I just gave you and cut them in half. So a more than 24-hour amputation of a leg at the hip, you have about a 3% survival rate.
So I remember at Antietam, they had some people just like propped up against the trees,
Mhm.
and they said those people they knew weren't going to make it. They
No,
just gave
we didn't really
alcohol.
have much on internal medicine.
Chest and abdominal wounds, we don't do much with. Although
They
the,
If
just
you're shot in the chest, we're
find
gonna
you a
try to
shady
make it
tree
comfortable
and
as
put you into God's hands. Oftentimes they would give them opium too. That was preferred
possible.
pain med.
Yeah.
We have opium in our pannier in 5 different varieties. We have 2 tablets and 3 liquids. So maybe our patient Lou here can't swallow a tablet for some reason. We'll give him liquid form.
So what about like head wounds? That was out too.
Well, we do have tools. There was some procedures done
Would this be
with
all
that.
the tools at your disposal, right? That you have right there.
No.
No.
You didn't have syringes or any kind of.
Oh yeah, we do have a syringe.
But not.
I don't have them out.
Not on the regular. Not
you
like
wouldn't
we do
inject.
now.
Head wounds. This is called a trephine, and basically it's a hole saw.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you have, it's for relieving intracranial pressure. So basically, what happens is where the patient is feeling pressure, we'll drill a hole. Now, there's a nice thing with this; it's got a depth gauge in here, so it will go only as far as you want it to go into the skull. And also, one interesting thing with this is conical, so the deeper you go, the wider the hole is going to become. Another reason why you would use this, if a patient, let's say, had a glancing blow to the head, didn't penetrate in, but it fractured the skull, what we can do is make like 3 holes with this, take our haze saw and connect the dots, if you will, take that portion of skull out using a tool called an elevator. Take our elevator, lift that portion of skull out. If it's not too badly splintered, we can reshape it, put it back into place. Keeping in mind that bone is a living tissue, it will fuse back together. Now with that intracranial pressure reason why we would use this, we would not put that plug of bone back in place because it will fuse shut and the problem won't be solved. So you just let that piece of bone out, the serum can seep out over time and relieves the pressure. So those are
How'd
our,
you make the hole with the knife?
yes,
Oh, so you
we
just
make
did
the
that.
hole with that and then connect the dots of those 3 holes with the haze saw.
There's an interesting story about McGuire when he was at a dinner party. Dr. Hunter McGuire, he was General
Jackson's
Thomas
personal,
Jackson, Stonewall Jackson's doctor. He hated that name, so I don't want to use it too much. But he had while the doc was at a dinner party, he had a patient come in. They were looking for him, and they found him. He put the guy on the table, cleared it off, was able to take a fork and bend it and create a lift. Yeah,
similar
an
to
elevator.
an elevator.
He put it right underneath and he pulled it up off the skull, saved the man's life.
Wow.
That's with a dinner fork.
Well, that's
He knew what he needed to do.
He knew what he needed. He was a hell of a doctor. Excuse my.
So our patient here, what's going to happen to him, he will go into our recovery, and the hospital tent that we have here, I will point out, is an original Civil War hospital tent, most likely used at Camp Letterman in Gettysburg. I used to say that my bone saw was my prized possession. That has, unfortunately for my saw, replaced as my prized possession.
So where is that saw from?
That's
I cannot tell you where it's from because I don't know, but there is a manufacturer's mark on here on the handle that dates it back to the Civil War era. Most of the tools that we have do have the manufacturer's name on it in some way or another. Like my amputation knives, they have George Tiemann and Sons on there. And Tiemann and Sons was the premier Civil War medical tool implement manufacturer at the time. So they were the ones to have. This one, like I said, is not a Tiemann and Sons, but it has a crown and the medical staff, the serpent around his staff. And the gentleman that I bought this from many years ago did indeed authenticate that manufacturer's mark dates back to the Civil War.
His foot's over there.
So-
Don't forget your foot over there.
Oh, I know. Thank
My
you.
kid would pick that. Hey, there's a foot over there.
So what will happen with those limbs, as we're doing this, you saw there's a basket of them over here. Instead of just letting them right here where we would potentially trip over them, or if they're bringing more soldiers wounded in, we'll get them out of the way. Eventually somebody's going to come around with either a basket or a wheelbarrow or something, gather them up, go dig a trench and bury them. So that's what will happen
I
to
couldn't
them.
imagine what it was like to bring people into. I mean, you're outside, you're cutting things off. It's like, that's what I was trying to tell her. Like, because I said, "You see that saw back there?" And she's like, "Where?" I was like, "Yeah."
Here's the limbs. that
Interesting, this is original too. The interesting part of it is, as the wounded are coming in, they're laying right out here, seeing what's going on. They might be over there in that portion, but they're seeing what's going on and knowing that they're next.
You want to ask them what that's for?
Look at this.
Go ahead, ask them. Don't be shy. They'll tell you.
So this is what you pulled through.
You got to cut through.
Yeah,
all
that
of
would
it.
have been cut off.
Yeah.
They would cut through it and the bone and all, Olivia, while the guy's still.
No, we
awake.
put them to sleep. Over 95% tourniquet, yes, that's a tourniquet. Over 95% of all procedures that were done at this time were under general anesthesia, and most people don't know that.
Okay.
So
We'll have to go up there one day.
If
There's a
you're
nice place in
interested,
Frederick.
either one of you
She's getting into history.
oh yeah, ether was discovered in 1842, and chloroform was about 5 years later. So by the time the war came around, it was widely used on both sides of the Mason-Dixon
I
line.
thought they were awake. I really did.
That's what most people think, unfortunately. That's why we
think
come
that's
out here and
from
do
the
this.
movies.
Exactly. That city out in California with its name up on the hill,
Yeah,
They
put
make
a
those
stick in their
productions.
mouth, let them
they
scream and bite down on it until
Yeah.
they pass out. It's like,
well, either that or bite on a bullet. You know, that's the other
That's such
options.
nonsense.
It is nonsense. And if anything, you know, a surgeon of any clout would never consider doing something like that. One stick maybe, but I'm not
I couldn't
buying
see
that.
a bullet.
A
That's
bullet,
just a
because
soft
what's
leather.
going to happen?
okay, yeah, like a belt or something.
Yeah,
You're not going to sacrifice their job.
exactly. So
Or
what
the
happens
teeth.
if they bite on a bullet
Yeah.
as we're impaling
fracture
him
you. It's gonna
before
break
he's put
your
to sleep? And if he incurs pain, what's he going to do? He's going to yell, ow, and it's going to go down his throat.
Yeah.
Now we need to retract that too. If he is biting on a bullet, he's not probably going to be on one side. It's not going to bite evenly, and he's going to end up breaking his jaw. So now that's another task that we have to tend to.
Say, excuse me.
As far as biting on something, I do have in my medicine box a piece of leather about that long that they could bite on. While we're probing him with him awake, that might be a situation where he could do that. But since he's already had 2 doses of opium before he gets on our table, he's probably not going to be feeling anything while we're doing that.
So what's the difference between laudanum and opium?
Laudanum is opium dissolved in alcohol. So it's a drinkable opium.
Okay.
We do have opium in 5 varieties in our panier. We have regular opium pills, and there are 60 dozen of that kind. We have camphorated opium pills that are, what's that?
Is that an inhalant?
No, it's a pill. You drink it. It is 20 dozen of that. So we have 80 dozen of opium pills. We have laudanum, which is about 6 ounces. We have camphorated laudanum, which is 12 ounces. And we have a liqueur of morphine sulfate, which is another 6 ounces. So we have plenty of pain meds available for our patients after their procedure.
But didn't they run out later in the war?
Confederates did. They
Yeah,
ran out of
Confederacy
everything.
did. Union
that
was
they-
well supplied pretty much the whole way.
The way that the Confederacy dealt with that was they had a man by the name of O'Shea go out and have it. Well, Moore, Samuel Preston
Samuel
Moore,
Preston Moore.
Surgeon General of the Confederacy, had